Kia ora, everybody. I'm Kylie. I am here to talk to you about not one, not two, but 3 projects that we have going in this space. Catherine alluded to the fact that we are looking at this earlier. So I'm just going to give you a quick roadmap through my presentation. I'm going to give you a why. Why is ConCOVE looking at that? I'm going to give you a bit about me, because I always like to be the centre of attention. And then I'm going to bring the panelists up, and I'm going to ask them some questions, because that's how panels work. And then I'm going to get you guys to do some stuff. And then I will wrap it all up and pass you on to our next presentation. So, tomorrow's trainers, supporting trainers to meet future industry needs. Why? Why are we doing this? Well, we know that VET is a key supplier to New Zealand's workforce. Because of that, a strong VET system is recognised internationally as enabling a strong economic environment. So that's what we want to do. Also, the TES, the Tertiary Education Strategy, talks about training educators. But what does that look like in the VET space? So, I know this is a construction site, but I'm going to tell you a bit about me. So I'm a recovering maths teacher. I spent 20 years in the compulsory education sector. I was that person teaching people about Pythagoras that they believed they would never use in their entire life. And I was pretty good at it. I had the technical knowledge. I could go into a maths class and I could deliver Year 9 algebra and actually get results. They could come out and understand how to use algebra. So because I was pretty good at it, I transitioned into teaching maths teachers how to teach maths. And because I was an educator to start with, I honestly thought, sweet, I've got this. I know exactly what I'm doing. Unfortunately, I had the pedagogy for teaching maths to Year 9s, algebra to Year 9s, but the andragogy, a word I can never remember, of teaching adults was completely different. So for me, that was a massive learning curve, because I thought I had it in the bag because I already taught. I also had to consider the identity, or developing that vocational identity, so that the person became a teacher. They didn't think, that they were faking it till they made it. They were really thinking about themselves, and they developed their own values and beliefs and ways of doing things. I also had to think about my networks and what I couldn't do, because I never taught Year 13 calculus. I left that to the smarter people in my department. So I had to be able to go, okay, I can teach this, but I need to pass you on here. Or what does it mean to be a teacher in terms of the Teachers' Council? So all of those kind of networks and associations that I needed to, that kind of were part of my everyday life, I then needed to pass that information on. So essentially, I became a dual professional. I was a teacher who could teach Year 9s how to do algebra, but I also had to learn how to teach maths teachers how to teach Year 9s how to do algebra, to do that thing. So, what does this mean for ConCOVE? Because obviously we're not in the business of developing maths teachers. What it is that VET education is not always seen as a high status. And often the training for some of our VET educators is not quite there. But we don't really know what good is. So we had a look at the VET education system, and we identified 3 key groups. And part of this started because of this project, supporting technical experts to become work-based trainers. So Jackie came to us and said, hey, I've got this really cool idea, and we went, we think that's an amazing idea. So the fabulous Jackie, I'm going to ask you to come up now. I don't have any music for you, sorry, but level 5 clap. So the fabulous Jackie came to us with this idea, and really looking at what does it mean to be a work-based trainer? That person on site who's supporting that apprentice, and what training might they need, and what training do they get? We then went out and said, hey, can someone do this for us? What happens in the classroom? How do we support that tradie to come into the classroom? And so what we did was we got Josh from Skills Consulting, Who's coming up now? Oh, you got your own music. And he brings his own soundtrack. And his research is looking specifically at that classroom-based. And then we were like, actually, there's one more person in there. And some people, and actually themselves, Sean pointed out yesterday, they don't necessarily see themselves as kaiako, but they're part of that education. And it's that training advisor, that person between the training organisation and the apprentice and the employer. So really important. So Sean from Allen+Clark has flown up from Wellington. Woo! And so these three pieces of research form what we currently call the trilogy, because we can't think of a better name just yet. And really what it is looking at the three different parts. So I've got a series of questions for these guys that I sprung on them yesterday. And they are going to talk about their research, because better have them than me. So I'm going to start with you, Sean. And I'd really love you to tell me, what is your biggest takeaway from the research that you've been doing?
I think this was a really hard one because there have been so many takeaways, but I think I will take the opportunity now to say that what we've really found interesting is that the level of variation between what training advisors, knowing that there's a lot of different terms for that, are expected to do for different training providers, and that draws really heavily on the context of the industry that training provider is working with, in the context of the businesses that are within that industry, things like the size of them. And so I just sort of wanted to use this question to reassure those in the audience that we're very conscious that there's probably, it might not be useful to have to try and take like a one-size-fits-all to what training advisors should or can do in the sector. And then I have many more, but we're allowed 1 minute, so I'll stop.
I'm going to pass that question over to Josh. What do you think are your biggest takeaways from the research that you're doing for classroom kaiako?
You only gave us the questions yesterday, but I've got the answers. Kia ora tātou katoa, anga mihi nui kia koutou. This journey from industry practitioner to classroom-based tutor kaiako is not about moving from one profession to another. It is about adding a profession on top of the profession you already have, which I think is an obvious point, but also an underappreciated one. These are the only people that can do this job. They are a very small talent pool, and we need them to come in, and we need to induct them well and support them. They've not just got to keep all those skills from their previous life, but also keep them current. And that is the implication. So, our research has taken a systems change model. Thank you, Makapatama. So we're looking at the structural conditions, the relational things, and the attitudinal things that either help or get in the way. Thanks.
Cool. Jackie?
I think for me, the biggest takeaway is that there's some really great practice already happening out there in the workplace, and we need to recognise that and not come in as technical experts ourselves, educationalists, saying that we know all the answers, because a lot of people really are effective in their training in the workplace, and we need to bottle that up. The other thing that came out was quite surprising in that some people described an ineffective work-based trainer as being someone who kind of like got quite hot-headed or impatient or didn't really know how to train, and those emotional competence skills were really important, and so that was a bit of an eye-opener for me too.
Cool. Josh, can you tell me, through this research, because I know you've come in with quite a considerable experience within the vocational education space, but what did you find that you weren't actually expecting?
This took me ages. Thank you, Kylie. And I've actually got two, and I'll see if I get time. The first one is that actually the reflections our stakeholders have given us on how much the teaching and learning process has changed over the years. So an off job is not just now someone comes in from the workplace and here's the procedure, go away and do it and come back later. They are talking about a collective exercise of problem solving together as a cohort, bringing in the challenges from the workplaces. What are you working on at the moment? What are you finding tricky? And kind of working on it in an extremely kind of a collaborative way. So there's been quite a lot of talk in terms of kaiako, about their own communities of practice. You know, they think about it like a tradies smoko room and like sharing those kinds of challenges. But to me, it was very much reminding me of compulsory education, where it's not sage from the stage anymore, it's guide on the side. And in many cases, some of the tutors saying it's the apprentices keeping us on our toes because they come in and go, we don't do it like that anymore.
Cool. Did you get both of them?
Second point's edgy. It's a meta finding. I think we kind of had terrible timing, but because we were trying to interview people, particularly within the Te Pukenga network, we kind of went along for the ride as the sands were shifting around them. Industrially, the authorising environment in Te Pukenga, who could speak to us, what was going on in Te Pukenga that they could or couldn't share. That actually made it quite challenging for us as researchers, but also I would have hated to have been living through that, so that was surprising.
Cool. Jackie, did you find anything similar or different, or what were you not expecting to find?
A lot of things, but one thing I think it's just really important, especially for people who are hiring or thinking about bringing in people who are work-based trainers, is that the motivation of those effective trainers is not what I thought. So I interviewed people in strategic roles, also the trainers themselves and apprentices, and the people in strategic roles tended to think that effective trainers did it because they wanted to give back to the industry, or that they were nearing retirement so they wanted to get off the tools. But the real reason those effective trainers said that they did the job was because they really like to see happy people at work. They like to see the apprentice grow over time. And the apprentices themselves noticed that as well. So that was really surprising.
Cool. Sean? Got anything to add?
I will be cheeky and have two as well, but they're very closely related. So the first thing that was sort of an immediate surprise to us as a research team was how many apprentices some training advisors are responsible for. And then the secondary surprise was that actually our assumption when we first found out how many it might be was that, okay, that's inherently a negative thing. But then actually, the more that we looked into it, the number of apprentices per training advisor isn't necessarily good or bad, because it's sort of the level of support that different apprentices require is going to be different, and there's just so many factors that go, and we're using the term adequate support to sort of reflect the fact that actually one apprentice might need a lot of support, but you could easily have 100 apprentices or so that need very minimal involvement from you, depending on the nature of the role that you're in and the nature of the industry that you're working in as well.
Cool. So Jackie, I'm going to come to you because you've done a really impressive wall, and it will be on our website soon. And it's really focused on the skills and knowledge that you think are needed to become an effective work-based trainer. So I might give you a little bit more than a minute on this one.
Thanks, Kylie. So at the end of the research, I'm kind of a practical person, so I wanted to come up with something kind of practical. So I came up with this framework that represented the voices of those I interviewed, and I made it into a retaining wall. So if we think about training and retaining apprentices, it was on that kind of thought, I suppose. And within that wall, there are 5 main areas and 15 different bricks or capabilities. And I've said knowledge and skills, but actually I think I'd prefer just to call it skills, because what I think is important is, I think what happens is that we focus too much on the knowledge and the theory rather than the actual skills that trainers have on job. So when it comes to those 15 skills, I said there were 5 different areas. So the first area is more around the trainer themselves, like, do they know themselves? How are they prepared for training? The second area is, do they know the learner? And the third area was about training skills themselves. The fourth area was about verification of competence, and the final area was building confidence and responsibility. So within those 5, I don't know, I'm not a builder, but like posts, you have all those other bricks, and those bricks are the skills. So they're little simple things like, I ask questions. I get to know the learner. Or it could be I plan jobs so people have a chance to practice the skills. And that's probably the summary of the findings, this retaining wall. And yeah, I think that's actually
Cool.
the main thrust.
I saw you nodding a lot there, Sean. Do you think there's similarities or differences in terms of what you found for training advisors?
Yeah, I think it's very similar, actually. I think, again, coming back to sort of my answer to the first question, that a lot of these answers are sort of necessarily quite general, I suppose, but what the consistent theme that we heard from the people that we spoke to is that the skills that are really highly valuable for a training advisor are sort of soft skills. Things like relationship building, being able to ask questions was a really important one. And that comes to something that I'm going to get to in the next question. But yeah, and I think... And I guess the other thing that has come through really strongly for us is that the skills that a very effective training advisor has would really make them very effective in pretty much any profession that I'm aware of. It seems to me that someone who's good at that job could walk into my job and do it extremely well. So I think it's a very valuable skill set that makes someone an effective training advisor, I think.
Wow. Josh?
Yeah, so the first thing would be that people first thing, and I mean that's a direct quote from one of the gifts our interviewers gave us. This is about people before skills. So the whatever is the technical skill sets or the technical skills being imparted, whether good teachers are born or made is a bit of an open question, and they certainly can be developed. But everybody, I think, if there was one kind of finding that didn't have a counterfactual from someone else, it was like actually the people skills matter first, and that's generally what drives people towards it in the first place. The actual answer to your question, there are 4. We read all the things. Teaching and assessment competency, including planning, designing, facilitating learning, learning support and pastoral care, catering for different learner groups' diversity and diversibility, and assessment and evaluation. Second one is industry, community and educational stakeholder engagement. That's important, staying connected with the industry, still having that trust, credibility, collaboration, speaking the same language. Professional capability and personal values and commitment. That personal commitment, that's what gets you through the bureaucratic and academic frustrations, is if you're deriving enough pleasure from the actual imparting of skills into the next generation. We heard that a lot. And that's interpersonal skills, continuous learning, and supporting or contributing to institution or systemic vocational quality.
Interesting.
Did I pass?
Yes, you did. Absolutely. So, Sean, I'm going to come back to you because you're talking a lot about skills, and in fact, all of you talk about the different, especially the relationships and the interpersonal skills. But, Sean, I'm going to ask you first in terms of how well do you think that training advisors are for their role?
What was the question again, sorry?
How well developed?
How well developed?
Yeah.
Or
so prepared.
The point that I originally, the question has changed slightly, but because there was originally the term that was used was kaiako, I believe, and I wanted to use that to make a point. I think
Cool.
so. It's an important one for training advisors. So kaiako sort of means teacher, but what we've really found is that probably a better word for training advisors would be kaiarahi or navigator, because really I think I'm going to eventually answer this question, but it's what a training advisor as a navigator, their level of preparation to do that sort of depends on the systems that are sitting behind them that they're able to broker for apprentices, and that's where those soft skills, I think, come in really strongly, because if you've got someone that's able to issue spot, and then the training advisor's employer has systems in place, which we've heard exist pretty well, that they can broker that support for an apprentice, then that's what I would say preparation really means.
Cool. Josh?
Yeah, so I sort of go back to that first answer about this is already a professional person moving into another profession, and so we heard a lot about the steep learning curve and the new language that they needed to learn, like everyone's talking about EFTs, what's an EFT, and so that first thing I think can be kind of quite overwhelming. So I think again, depending on the individual makeup of that person, is whether or not they'll thrive or dive, I guess, in that environment. We did hear horror stories about, people that their managers and experts and, were sad to see go because it just kind of broke them. They weren't able to make that transition effectively. On the other hand, we heard about careful, considered and managed induction processes that supported that whole journey very well. And we also heard about people that just loved it, just dove in and, so I think all of those three things were true. So, it's one of those it varies answer. Look, I think one of the things, and I remember talking about this last year in Christchurch after our first stage, which was the literature review, should it be such a learning curve? Wouldn't the trust and the credibility of the system be better if we just thought of it all as this is how vocational providers collaborate with industry, rather than this is an alternative way to train for the industry or outside the industry? So rather than kind of this is a world and this is a completely different world, I think to the more and greater extent that can actually be a real and meaningful collaboration, because that's part of staying current, the better.
Cool. So, Jackie?
Yeah, that's an interesting point, Josh. And, having just been recently talking to researchers in Stockholm about this from German and Swiss contexts, it does seem that the relationship between the education provider and the business is very strong. And I would say that's a very important part, because in terms of, I think your original question was how prepared kaiako. I think it depends on the workplace and the relationship that they do have with that education provider. I think the off-the-shelf solutions are not fit for purpose. So if you might send someone on a site supervision course that has nothing to do with training in there at all. So that's not going to be very useful. You might send someone on a unit standard 4098. Hands up if you know 4098 is an assessor qual. That's not going to be very helpful. You might send someone on a train the trainer course that's really based on classroom trainers. That's not going to be really helpful. So, we need something innovative in that space. So, yeah, that's what I would say.
Cool. I'm actually running out of time, so we're not going to get to the next question. But what I'm going to ask the audience to do is, at your tables, if you could have a conversation just around what you already do and actually any kind of similarities and differences in terms of the conversation you've just heard, and then I'll move on to the next one. But I'd just really like to thank you guys. These guys are going to be around, so you can ask some questions and everything like that. But yeah, huge thanks. Cool. So if you just talk to the person next to you about what you've just heard, there is another part to my presentation. You guys. Hey? Sure. Okay, I'm actually going to put the question up on the board. So, sorry, Jackie, I'm standing in front of you here. So what I'd like you to think about, creative collaboration at your tables. We don't have a lot of time for this, but I really think it's quite important that we consider how can we move from individual thinking in terms of, we already induct our kaiako, or we already have that, and sort of move to a bit more of a collective. Josh alluded to that a bit earlier, and work together to become world leaders, because that's what we want to be. We want people to do delegations to New Zealand instead of having to go to Germany. So if you could just jot down some ideas on your piece of paper in terms of how we do that. Thank you. A key idea of this project is we've done them separately. You've done 3 separate projects for a specific reason, because each of those parts of the system are seen as separate parts. But actually, as some of the panelists talked about, are they? Because you've got somebody, they get trained, they become a work-based trainer, they go into classroom, or they might go into training advisor. Everything is cyclic and everything is part of the system. So I'm just going to leave you with this. Remember, we want people in the vet to be their best. So we want quality workforce. So moving through the system to become So therefore, moving through the system to become productive, confident members of the construction and infrastructure sector. We cannot do that without each of those different groups of kaiako. So that's why we're bringing it all together. So once again, thank you to my panelists, and thank you to the room for your knowledge that we will be taking with us and using in the next phase. Kia ora.